My brother and sister made our mother homeless. Told her it was just for tax purposes. Took her house, sold her things, left her in a car with hypertension. Told family she was in a lovely senior lodge. I found her in a hospital. Now they're facing court. My name is Leo. I'm 34 years old, a mechanical engineer living in Denver. It's been a few years since I left my hometown in Georgia, and I thought I was adjusting just fine. But then, something started shifting. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was there, lingering in the back of my mind like a low hum I couldn't shake off. For as long as I could remember, my mom, Ellen, had always called me twice a week. Tuesdays and Thursdays, like clockwork. No matter what I was doing, she'd always pick up the phone. We'd talk about anything, her garden, the weather, how her book club was going, the latest gossip about the neighbors. But mostly, it was her asking me how I was doing, how work was going, how life was treating me. She always made sure I knew she was there. Then, things changed. At first, it was small, just a little off. One Tuesday, I called like I always did, but she didn't pick up. I assumed she was busy, maybe out running errands. No big deal. But Thursday came, and still nothing. No message, no call. So, I called again. Same thing. Voicemail. I left her a message, of course, but something in my gut twisted. It wasn't like her. It wasn't like us. The calls came the next week, but they were shorter. More rushed. How's work? She'd ask, then quickly follow up with, oh, I've got to go. Honey, I'll call you next week. And she did, but the conversations started getting more vague. She'd mention things like, I'm busy with the craft circle, or I'm doing a little bit of traveling. I thought it was odd. Mom had never been the traveling type. She was a homebody, always planting flowers or volunteering at the local library. This craft circle sounded new. It was all a little off, but I didn't question it. Maybe she was just finding a new hobby, and it made her happy. I wasn't concerned at first. But then, it started becoming more frequent. The texts started coming in odd hours. Busy. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Everything's okay. They were short, almost robotic. She even started sending me these weird texts with pictures of random things. Flowers, recipes, a cup of tea. Nothing meaningful, nothing personal. It hit me, finally, when I suggested coming back for the Fall Harvest Festival. I wanted to visit, spend some time with her. I hadn't been home in a while. But then Malcolm, my older brother, the financial consultant, shut it down. She's busy, he said, his tone dismissive, like I should have already known. Mom's traveling with her crafts circle this year, Leo. She's got a lot going on. She doesn't want to be bothered. I let it slide. It didn't sit well, but I pushed it out of my mind. Malcolm always had an answer for everything. He always knew what was best, or at least, that's what he liked to think. But there was something in me that didn't feel right. I didn't want to believe it, but my gut was telling me to listen. I tried to set up a video call, just to see her face. I'd been busy with work, and I figured it might help me feel closer, especially with how much distance had grown between us. But when I called, she told me her phone camera was broken. Oh, honey, I'll get it fixed soon, she promised, but I could hear the strain in her voice. That was the moment I felt it. The distance, the unease. It was more than just the passing of time. Something was off, something wasn't being said. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more happening than I realized. I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. It wasn't until I offered to visit, after all the phone calls had gone quiet for a while, that Malcolm dropped the bombshell. He brushed it off like it was nothing, but the words were like ice in my veins. She's fine, he said, but his eyes flickered, not meeting mine. You don't need to worry about Mom, Leo. She's just not the same. She's doing her own thing. Trust me, it's better this way. I wanted to argue. I wanted to press him on it, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I stood there, feeling my heart sink a little deeper, a quiet unease creeping through me. I should have trusted my instincts then, but I didn't. Not yet. Still, in the back of my mind, the thought lingered. The disconnection. The distance. And as much as I tried to push it away, something told me that what I was hearing from Malcolm and what I was feeling in my gut weren't lining up. The call came on a Wednesday morning, a cold rush of panic through my chest. I had just gotten off a conference call at work when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something stopped me. I picked up. Hello, Mr. Carter? The voice on the other end was sharp, professional. This is Dr. Patel from the Fairview Medical Center in Alabama. I'm calling about your mother, Ellen Carter. She's here with us. My stomach twisted. What happened? Is she okay? She collapsed at a local hardware store. She's been admitted. The doctors believe it was a combination of untreated high blood pressure and severe malnutrition. I'm afraid she's been living out of her car for some time now. I couldn't breathe. My brain short-circuited. Living out of her car? The words tasted like ash in my mouth. She's stable now, Dr. Patel continued, her voice softening. But we need someone to come take care of her. We can't release her until there's a proper care plan in place. It was like I was hearing everything through a fog, my mind struggling to process it. I'll be there as soon as I can. I hung up, my heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I was shaking as I grabbed my jacket and keys, barely registering the world around me. The drive felt like it took forever, my thoughts spinning in a chaotic whirl of confusion, disbelief, and dread. My mom, the woman who'd always been so strong, so independent, living in her car? How was this possible? When I pulled into the parking lot of Fairview Medical Center, I nearly ran inside. I asked the receptionist where I could find my mom, and after a few minutes, they led me down a sterile hallway to a small, private room. I barely recognized her at first. She was sitting up in bed, her frail frame wrapped in an oversized hospital gown. Her skin was pale, her face thinner than I'd ever seen it. Her once vibrant blue eyes were dull and tired. She looked like she hadn't slept in months, and the layers of coats she wore to keep warm were still draped over her shoulders, as if she couldn't let go of the cold that had followed her. She looked up when I entered, her eyes widening in surprise, but then quickly shifting to guilt. "Leo," she whispered, her voice weak. I didn't want to burden you. I sat down beside her, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I could barely speak. You've been living in your car?" My voice cracked, and I had to swallow hard to keep it steady. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want you to know. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I couldn't." She looked down at her hands, twisting the blanket in her lap. "I was just trying to avoid troubling you, Leo. I didn't want to be a burden." I wanted to tell her she wasn't a burden, that there was nothing she could ever do to make me not want to help. But it felt like something deeper was wrong, something that went beyond her just falling on hard times. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle despite the anger building inside me. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me?" "I didn't want you to worry," she whispered again. "You have your own life, your own family, your brother and Bree. They were so busy, and I didn't want to be a problem." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I had a sinking feeling. "What do you mean? What happened?" She hesitated, looking at the floor as though she couldn't meet my eyes. "Malcolm and Bree. They told me to sign over the house. They said it was for estate simplification. They said I wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." I froze. Estate simplification? What the hell did that even mean? "They told me to sign it all over to them," she continued in a barely audible voice, her hands wringing the blanket. "I thought it was the right thing to do, Leo. They said I'd be free of the burden of the house, that they'd help me with my finances. But then they changed the locks, and they told me I couldn't come back." I felt like I'd been hit in the chest. Malcolm and Bree, my brother, the financial consultant, and my sister, the art gallery owner, had done this. They'd manipulated my mom into signing everything over, then locked her out. "They abandoned me, Leo," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "They told me I couldn't come back. I didn't have anywhere to go. I couldn't ask you." I closed my eyes, breathing deeply to keep myself from losing control. Malcolm and Bree had done this to her. They'd taken everything from her, and they hadn't even cared enough to help her when she needed it most. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling with rage, "they lied to you. They used you. This isn't your fault." She shook her head slowly. "I should have seen it, Leo. But they were so convincing. They said it was for the best." I squeezed her hand, trying to steady the overwhelming anger flooding through me. "It's not for the best. It's theft, and I'm going to make them pay for this." But as the words left my mouth, I realized something. I wasn't just angry. I was heartbroken. My own family had betrayed us. And all along, I trusted them. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how far they'd gone to manipulate her, how much they'd taken from her, and how little they cared. I turned to my mother, my resolve hardening. "Don't worry, Mom. We're going to fix this. We're going to get you back what's yours." But in my heart, a quiet voice kept asking, how far would I have to go to make sure they paid for what they'd done? It was 2 days later when I finally gathered the strength to confront Malcolm. The hospital visit had shaken me more than I let on. I had spent the night trying to process everything, my mind racing through the endless implications of what had happened. The reality of my mother's situation hit me hard, but it was the thought of what Malcolm and Bree had done that twisted my stomach into knots. I'd always known my brother was ruthless when it came to money, but I never thought he'd go this far. This wasn't just about financial gain. This was betrayal. A betrayal so deep that it went beyond anything I could have imagined. And now, it was time to make him face the consequences. I didn't know where he was staying, but it didn't matter. Malcolm was always at the family home, the place they'd grown up in. I pulled up to the house, taking a moment to breathe before I rang the doorbell. The front yard was perfectly manicured, exactly as I remembered it. The garden was lush with flowers, their vibrant colors standing in stark contrast to the unease I felt creeping through my chest. The door opened after a few seconds, and there he was, standing in the doorway with his usual smirk. Malcolm looked the same, dressed in his tailored suit, his posture stiff, like he was ready to give a speech. "Leo," he said with that self-assured grin. "What brings you here? Everything okay?" I pushed past him, not waiting for an invitation. My gaze immediately went to the familiar furnishings inside. The large armoire that once belonged to Mom, the dining set that had been lovingly restored by Dad before he passed. They were all here, in pristine condition, just like they'd always been. I couldn't help but feel the anger rise up inside me. This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything they had taken from her. "Why did you do it, Malcolm?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with fury. "Why did you make her sign everything over to you?" Malcolm's expression didn't change. He didn't even flinch. "It was for the best, Leo. Estate simplification. You should understand that. It wasn't about taking anything from her. It was about making sure everything was in order for the future." I took a step forward, not caring if I looked intimidating. "She trusted you. You manipulated her. You took everything from her, Malcolm, and then you locked her out. That is what you did." He looked away, just for a moment, like he was searching for something to say, but he quickly regained his composure. "She's fine. She was never going to be able to manage that house by herself, Leo. It was too much for her." "That's not your decision to make," I snapped. "She's my mother, Malcolm, not yours. You had no right." He rolled his eyes, finally looking at me as if he couldn't be bothered. "Oh, come on. You know she wasn't managing the place. It was falling apart, and you know it. You didn't want to take care of her. You didn't even see her." His words cut deep. I had been busy with my life, yes, but I never once let that stop me from calling her, checking in. I never once thought my mother needed to be saved from herself. It wasn't like I hadn't tried to keep in touch, but my focus had been elsewhere, and I had to admit, I had distanced myself, too. And for what? To focus on my career? "Shut up," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You knew what you were doing, and you didn't care. You just wanted to get her out of the picture. You and Bree. You took her house, her money, and then you just left her to fend for herself." "I didn't leave her to fend for herself," Malcolm said, his voice rising with irritation. "She signed it over. We made sure she was taken care of." "Taken care of? By you?" I scoffed. "You think she wanted to live in a damn car? She was scared, Malcolm. Scared of being thrown out into the streets. And you think that's taking care of her?" I could see it now, his mask cracking ever so slightly. The smugness, the sense of superiority he carried with him, was beginning to fade. But still, he stood firm. "You're making this worse than it is, Leo. She'll be fine. She'll be better off without that house. You're too emotional about all this." It felt like a slap to the face. "You don't even know her, do you? You don't know what it's like to have to rely on people like you, to trust someone you thought loved you, only to find out they only wanted what they could get from you." There was a long pause before Malcolm spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I didn't mean to hurt her, Leo. I thought I was doing the right thing." I shook my head. "No, Malcolm, you weren't doing the right thing. You were doing what was best for you. What was best for you and Bree, and you used her to get it." The silence in the room was thick. The weight of the truth hung between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Malcolm shifted slightly, his eyes flicking to the family heirlooms in the living room. "I don't know why you're so upset about this. It's not like you were ever planning to take care of her." I took a step back, my body trembling with rage. I was planning to take care of her. But you and Bree, you shut me out. You didn't give me a chance to help. You didn't give her a chance. He shrugged, the indifference now a shield, but I could see the cracks in his facade. It's done now, Leo. There's nothing we can do about it. The house is in our hands now. That's where you're wrong, I said, my voice cold. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done. I'm going to make sure that what you did to her doesn't go unpunished. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. You really think you can do anything about it? You'll never get past the lawyers. I'll get past them, I said, meeting his eyes, my voice steady. Because what you did was wrong. He didn't answer. Instead, he just stared at me, like he was trying to read something in my expression. But whatever it was, he didn't say it. I turned toward the door. You haven't heard the last of this. As I walked away, I heard him behind me, his voice low but sharp. You'll regret this, Leo. You can't just walk away from family. I stopped for a moment, my hand on the door handle. I looked back at him. I just did. And with that, I left. It was a week before I could bring myself to go through the evidence. I had spoken to my lawyer, Maria, as soon as I'd left Malcolm's house. She was quick to see how deep this went, how much they'd hidden, how much they'd stolen. But we both knew this wouldn't be easy. The truth was complicated. What Malcolm and Bree had done was illegal, yes, but proving it was another matter entirely. I spent the next few days sorting through everything I could find: emails, bank statements, old tax returns. There was a part of me that didn't want to believe it, that wanted to just close my eyes and hope it was a misunderstanding. But there was no escaping it. Not when I sat down in front of my laptop and began opening file after file, piecing together what had happened. The whole thing felt like I was unraveling the truth of my family. Everything I had taken for granted was just gone. The first major revelation came when I accessed my mom's bank account history. I'd always assumed her finances had been steady, that she had enough to live on without needing me. But now, seeing the transactions, it was clear how much she had been manipulated. There were frequent transfers, large sums of money, sometimes just weeks apart. They weren't just withdrawals for groceries or bills. These were straight-up transfers to Malcolm and Bree. I pulled up the emails Malcolm had sent her, the ones she'd forwarded to me over the years. Each time, they were the same, polite, but pushing. He made it sound like he was doing her a favor, streamlining things. But the truth, when you looked at it in black and white, was horrifying. I scrolled through the accounts for hours, documenting everything. Bank accounts, stocks, bonds, whatever was in her name, had been siphoned off. Then there were the Social Security checks. I couldn't believe it. Every month, Malcolm and Bree had been cashing them, forging her signature in the process. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a simple mix-up. But as I dug deeper, it became clear this had been a regular occurrence. They'd taken thousands of dollars from her, with no plan to return any of it. They were running a full-on scam. I could feel my chest tightening with each new piece of information, but I knew this was the only way to make sure they didn't get away with it. I couldn't let them walk away clean. Not after everything they'd done. By the time I called Ronald, the CPA who had worked with Malcolm in the past, I was already exhausted from the emotional toll of it all. I knew Ronald had been involved in some capacity. I had seen his name in the bank statements. But I didn't know how much he knew, or if he'd just been part of the whole operation. When he picked up the phone, he sounded reluctant, but I pushed through. Ronald, I need you to be honest with me. What did you know about Malcolm and Bree's actions regarding my mother's finances? There was a long pause. Then, finally, Ronald spoke in a low, careful voice. Look, Leo, I've worked with your brother for years. He's always been careful with his family's money. When he said your mom needed help with her finances, I didn't think anything of it. But now that I see what you're asking, I have to say, I didn't know it would go this far. I leaned forward, holding my breath. What do you mean, this far? What did they do? They convinced her to liquidate her pension, he said, his voice tinged with regret. They said it was to simplify her estate, get rid of any assets that might be complicated to manage. But that wasn't what they were doing. They were cashing out everything, Leo. They were taking her money, transferring it to their own accounts, all while pretending to help her. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It was one thing to suspect what they were doing, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. I stayed silent for a long moment, trying to process everything he'd just said. Did you ever question it? I asked, my voice tight. I should have. I didn't, Ronald admitted. But they told me she was fine with it, that she was happy to simplify things. I didn't want to question it, but now I see. They were using her. I'm so sorry, Leo. I didn't know what to say. Ronald was one of the few people who could have stopped this, who could have raised a red flag when Malcolm first started pushing her to give up control of her assets. But instead, he had gone along with it. I'm going to need everything you've got on them, I said finally. Emails, transaction records, anything that can prove they've been stealing from her. I'll send it all to you, Ronald promised. But, Leo, I don't know what's going to happen. Your brother's a powerful man. He won't go down without a fight. I'm not afraid of him, I said firmly, and I'll make sure he faces the consequences of what he did. After hanging up, I immediately forwarded everything I had gathered to Maria. She called me the next day, confirming that I had a solid case. We now had evidence of financial abuse and fraud, clear proof of what my siblings had been doing behind my mother's back. But there was a catch. We needed more. We needed Ellen. We needed her testimony, her willingness to speak up about what had happened. But there was one problem. She wasn't ready to face it. She was still defending them, still clinging to the idea that they had only wanted what was best for her. Sitting in my apartment that night, going over the evidence one more time, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The legal battle was only just beginning. But I couldn't stop now. I had to make them face what they had done, make them pay for taking advantage of our mother. I had no choice but to fight, and I would fight until the very end. The courtroom was cold, sterile, almost suffocating. I had always imagined legal battles to be dramatic, fast-paced, full of heated exchanges and passionate speeches, but in reality, it was long hours of silence, the occasional shuffle of papers, and the slow tick of the clock on the wall. But I knew better than to underestimate what was at stake here. I sat in the front row, flanked by Maria, my lawyer. The courtroom was nearly empty, save for a few people who had shown up for unrelated cases. Malcolm and Bree were sitting on the other side, both of them looking like they belonged there, dressed to the nines, exuding the same arrogance they had shown for years. Malcolm was a picture of control, his eyes scanning the room as if this was just another step in the day. Bree, however, couldn't hide the nervousness. She kept fidgeting with her phone, her eyes flicking to the door as if she expected someone, anyone, to come through and save her. But no one was coming. Not this time. It was just me, standing in the way of everything they had taken from my mother. The judge entered, a middle-aged man with graying hair and sharp eyes, and the proceedings began. It was all so methodical, questions, objections, arguments. But the focus, for now, was on temporary guardianship. Maria had been clear with me. If we could prove that my mother was in a vulnerable state, that she had been manipulated, we could at least stop Malcolm and Bree from further accessing her assets. As we waited for our turn, I couldn't stop thinking about the last conversation I'd had with my mom. She was still clinging to the idea that Malcolm and Bree had been trying to help her, that they'd only done what was best for her. It broke my heart to hear her defend them like that. I had to remind myself that this was for her, even if she couldn't yet see it. When it was finally our turn, Maria stood and addressed the judge, her voice steady and confident. Your Honor, this is not just a simple case of financial oversight. This is a case of financial abuse. My client, Leo Carter, has gathered substantial evidence that his mother, Ellen Carter, was manipulated into signing away all her assets, her home, her savings, under duress. Malcolm and Bree Carter took advantage of her trust, and, with the support of a CPA they manipulated, systematically stripped her of everything she owned. I could feel the weight of the words settle in the room. I had always known what they had done was wrong, but hearing it in the courtroom, with the full weight of the law behind it, made it feel real. I wasn't just telling a story anymore. I was telling the truth. Malcolm leaned forward, whispering something to Bree, who shot me a glance. It was one of those glances that said everything. You're wasting your time. You can't win this. But I wasn't intimidated. I was done being scared. Maria continued, laying out the financial evidence piece by piece. Bank transfers, emails from Ronald the accountant, forged signatures on my mom's pension checks, everything I had gathered over the last week. The documents stacked high on the table in front of us were irrefutable. They couldn't run from this. Furthermore, Maria said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room, there are text messages and emails showing that these actions were not only taken without Ellen's knowledge, but that she was intentionally kept in the dark. even when she reached out for help. These people took advantage of her trusting nature, and we have the proof. I could see Malcolm's jaw tighten as the evidence mounted against him. But Bree, she was visibly starting to crack. She kept shifting in her seat, tapping her fingers against the table, glancing nervously at the judge. The judge, a man who had been quietly listening throughout, finally spoke. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Is this the same case you're representing in regards to the guardianship request?" Maria nodded, pulling out one more piece of evidence, an email from Bree, sent to their family lawyer, where she had mentioned helping Ellen simplify her estate, and then casually referred to liquidating everything for her. The phrasing was cold, detached. It was like they were talking about a business deal, not someone's life. "Yes, Your Honor," Maria said. "This email, sent from Bree Carter, proves that they were planning to liquidate Ellen's estate for their own gain. And not only that, but they specifically designed a system to make sure she would have no way of accessing her own money or assets." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The weight of what had just been laid out hung in the air like a thick fog. Malcolm was visibly trying to hold it together, but the cracks were showing. His eyes darted around the room, and I saw him lean over to Bree, whispering something too low for me to hear. She nodded, but her face was pale. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to fight back like this. The judge took a long, measured look at the evidence before him, then glanced at the opposing side. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he began, "I trust you'll have something to say in your defense." Malcolm stood, his voice smooth, his posture immaculate. "Your Honor, as I've stated before, our intention was never to harm our mother. We simply wanted to simplify her estate, streamline her finances. I understand my brother's concerns, but I assure you, everything we did was to make sure our mother could live a comfortable life without the burden of managing an estate that was becoming too much for her." He paused, eyes scanning the room, before he continued. "I am the one who manages finances professionally. I know how these things work. My sister and I did what was best for her, with her best interests in mind." There it was, his defense. He was playing the role of the protector, the professional, the one who knew what was best. But it was all smoke and mirrors. His words were hollow. Maria didn't let him get away with it. "Your Honor," she said, standing up, "I'm afraid Mr. Carter's words are simply not supported by the facts. We have shown clear evidence that his actions were self-serving, that he and his sister manipulated their mother for their own benefit, and that they isolated her from her own resources. We are not here to litigate financial matters. We are here because this is a case of exploitation, and we ask that temporary guardianship be granted to Mr. Leo Carter." The judge considered it for a long moment. Then, in a surprising move, he nodded slowly. "Given the evidence provided, I am granting temporary guardianship of Ellen Carter to her son, Leo Carter. I am also freezing all assets currently under Malcolm and Bree Carter's control until a full forensic audit can be completed." I felt like the world had just shifted beneath me. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but this was a huge win. I could feel the tension leave my body, like I had finally taken a breath after holding it for too long. The judge continued, his voice steady. "Furthermore, I will be ordering a forensic audit of all transactions made by Malcolm and Bree Carter over the past 2 years to ensure there are no further irregularities. This court will reconvene once that audit is complete." I turned to Maria, who was already smiling, small but satisfied. "We're just getting started," she said softly. I looked back at Malcolm and Bree, who were now staring at me, their faces masks of disbelief and fury. This was just the beginning, and I wasn't going to stop until they paid for everything they had taken from my mother. I'd won this round, but the fight was far from over. It didn't take long for the retaliation to begin. As soon as the court ruling came down, I knew things would get ugly. But nothing could have prepared me for how quickly it would escalate. The silence that followed the hearing was brief, just long enough for me to feel like I could breathe again, before the storm came crashing down. It started with the voicemails. The first one came 2 days later. I was sitting at my desk at work, going through some paperwork, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before picking it up. "Leo, this is Bree." The voice on the other end was sharp, controlled, but with an undertone of fury that I could hear clearly. "You've made a mistake. You think you can just take everything from us? You've crossed a line. Do you really think anyone in this family is going to stand by you? You're not the hero here, Leo. You're the villain. The voicemail clicked off, and I sat there for a second, processing the words. There was nothing subtle about it. It was a threat, disguised as an accusation. But what struck me more than anything was how quickly Bree's demeanor had shifted. She had always been the picture of polished charm, but now, she was desperate. It wasn't just her. Malcolm was next. Leo, I need you to stop. His voice was cold and calculated, the way it always had been when he was trying to get his way. This isn't over, and you don't have the upper hand. You're going to regret this. I'm going to make sure of it. I knew what he meant by that. He wasn't just threatening me. He was threatening my livelihood, my reputation. My heart tightened as I imagined what lengths he would go to in order to make this a nightmare for me. But I wouldn't back down. I couldn't. The calls came flooding in after that. And the messages. They weren't even trying to hide their intentions anymore. The threats started showing up on my social media in the form of cryptic posts and passive-aggressive comments. It felt like they were trying to tear me down from every angle. Every chance they had to publicly smear my name, they took it. I'd always known my family was capable of a lot, but this was something else. It was the kind of hostility that you couldn't ignore. It was the kind of manipulation that didn't just attack you directly, but aimed to break you down slowly, piece by piece. But things really hit a turning point the night I got the first of the threatening letters. It was a Tuesday, about a week after the court hearing. I had just gotten home from work, my mind still buzzing with the day's events, when I noticed something odd on the front step. A manila envelope, with no return address, sitting just outside my door. My pulse quickened as I reached for it, feeling that knot in my stomach again. I ripped it open, my hands shaking slightly, as I unfolded the contents. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, typed out in an impersonal font. If you don't stop now, things will get worse. This is your last warning. You've made enemies of the wrong people. We know where you live, Leo. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The message was clear. They were coming for me, and they weren't playing around. I held the letter in my hands for a long moment, the weight of it sinking in. I wasn't just up against Malcolm and Bree anymore. This was something bigger. The people they knew, the people they could reach. This was the kind of intimidation I had only read about in the tabloids. I felt my chest tighten with fear. But I wasn't about to let them win. Not after everything my mom had been through. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about her. About making sure they paid for every single thing they'd done to her. I took the letter to Maria the next morning. We went through it carefully, discussing the possible implications. It wasn't the first time a situation like this had escalated, but the fact that they had gone this far, well, it made things a lot more personal. Maria reassured me, though. She'd been through legal battles before, and this wasn't going to stop her from moving forward. We'll file a harassment report, she said firmly. And if they escalate further, we'll go to the police. But, Leo, you need to be prepared. This could get ugly. That's when I realized how deeply I had underestimated what they were capable of. But I also realized something else. They were just as desperate as I was. And desperation made people dangerous. A couple of days later, it wasn't just the letters or the calls that kept me on edge. It was the intimidation that began to bleed into my day-to-day life. It was subtle at first, the way people in my building would suddenly avoid me in the hallway, or how the guy at the coffee shop would act like he didn't recognize me when I came in for my usual order. But it was starting to feel like they were isolating me, making me feel like I had no one to turn to. Then came the public smear campaign. It started with Bree. One evening, I was scrolling through my phone when I saw a post from her on Facebook. She'd posted an article, but it was the caption that made my blood run cold. When family turns on you, it's nothing short of betrayal. Some people would do anything for money, even if it means tearing apart the people they love. I knew she was talking about me. The timing was too perfect, and the comments beneath it, they were full of support. My family was turning against me, telling me I was wrong. They were painting me as the villain. It didn't stop there. Malcolm's lawyer, an old family friend, started calling around to my clients, asking questions about my integrity, my ability to work. There were whispers at my firm, subtle but damaging. Every step I took, they were right behind me, shadowing my every move. I knew they were trying to break me, to make me back down, but I wasn't going to let them. I couldn't. Not after everything they had done. Maria had filed the necessary paperwork for the harassment claims, and I was preparing to present everything in court. But as the pressure mounted, I felt myself slipping into a darker place. The stress, the isolation, the fear, It was getting to me. But the thing about facing your fears is that once you confront them, they lose some of their power. So that's what I did. I confronted them. The next time Bree posted something online, I replied. It was simple, direct, and to the point. The truth is coming, Bree. Everything you've done will be exposed. You can't run from it forever. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The day of the final hearing arrived like a storm cloud that had been gathering for weeks, and when it hit, it brought everything with it. I stood in front of the courtroom doors, my palms slick with sweat, but my resolve firmer than it had ever been. This was the day everything would come to a head. It was more than just a legal battle. It was the culmination of everything Malcolm and Bree had stolen from my mother and me. It was my last chance to make sure they paid for what they'd done. Maria had been confident, even when the threats and intimidation escalated. She'd walked me through the steps, told me we had a strong case. But I knew. They knew. This wasn't going to be easy. It was a final fight. If we won, my mom would be free, her finances protected, her dignity restored. If we lost, they would walk away without a single consequence, having manipulated the system for their gain. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw Malcolm and Bree already sitting at the defendant's table, their faces like polished marble, pretending to be calm. Malcolm had the same air of superiority, as if he had all the answers, as if this was just another small problem to solve. Bree, on the other hand, looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she kept glancing nervously toward the door. She knew the stakes. I could feel the weight of their stares as I sat down. Every inch of me felt like it was being scrutinized. The air in the room was thick, charged. But I wasn't backing down now. The judge, a no-nonsense man with sharp eyes and a stern demeanor, entered the room. The gavel came down with a resounding thud. "Court is now in session," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We are here today to settle the matter of guardianship for Ellen Carter, as well as the allegations of financial abuse levied against Malcolm and Bree Carter. I expect order and decorum from all parties. Miss Carter, please present your case." Maria stood, her posture straight, her voice steady as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, as we have outlined in the documents submitted to this court, my client, Leo Carter, has been granted temporary guardianship over his mother, Ellen Carter, following evidence of systematic financial manipulation by her children, Malcolm and Bree Carter. This evidence includes fraudulent withdrawals, the unauthorized liquidation of her estate, and other forms of financial exploitation." She moved to the table and began laying out the key points once again. The emails, the bank statements, the forged signatures. It was all irrefutable. The entire courtroom listened in silence as she walked through the steps of the fraud they had committed, pointing to the documents projected on the screen. Malcolm's face never wavered, but Bree's eyes darted nervously from the judge to the screen, then to me. The guilt was starting to show through, even if she tried to hide it behind her cool facade. When it came time for them to speak, Malcolm stood first. He adjusted his suit jacket, smoothing it down with a practiced hand before addressing the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth but laced with arrogance. "I'd like to clarify that my sister and I had only the best intentions when managing our mother's estate. We believed, based on her wishes, that it would be beneficial to simplify her finances so that she wouldn't have to deal with the complexities of her property. What my brother is portraying as financial abuse was, in fact, an attempt to alleviate her burden. He made it sound so reasonable, so convincing, but I knew better. This wasn't about helping my mom. This was about control." Maria wasted no time. "Your Honor, while Mr. Carter's intentions may have been framed as helpful, the actions taken by him and his sister went beyond simplifying her estate. They were designed to remove her from her own life. We've seen evidence of coercion, misrepresentation, and forgery. These were deliberate steps taken to control her assets and, ultimately, her life." Bree stood next, her hands shaking slightly as she took the stand. She tried to hold herself together, but her voice cracked when she spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said quietly. I thought we were doing what was best for Mom. We thought she needed us to handle things. But it wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant to take anything from her." Her eyes flickered to Malcolm for support, but he didn't look at her. He was busy staring at me, his gaze cold and calculating. The judge didn't buy it. MS. Carter, do you deny that you were involved in the unauthorized withdrawal of funds from your mother's account? That you liquidated her pension and assets without her knowledge or consent? Bree's breath hitched, and she lowered her gaze. I didn't, she started, but her voice trailed off. Malcolm jumped in, his voice a little sharper now. Your Honor, my sister and I were acting in what we believed was her best interest. We didn't think she could handle managing these things on her own. We didn't take anything from her. But it was too late. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge's stern gaze never wavered, and his next words cut through the room like a knife. It is clear from the evidence presented today that both of you have mismanaged and exploited your mother's assets. I am revoking the temporary guardianship granted to Mr. Carter. Effective immediately, Leo Carter will retain full guardianship over his mother, Ellen Carter, and I am ordering a full forensic audit of all financial transactions made by Malcolm and Bree Carter over the past 2 years. There was a long pause, the gravity of the decision settling over the room. I could feel the satisfaction in my chest, the tension starting to release. But Malcolm and Bree, they were stunned. They had been so sure that they would win this, that their lies would be enough to cover their tracks. But it wasn't. Additionally, the judge continued, I am freezing all assets currently under the control of Malcolm and Bree Carter until the forensic audit is completed. If any further attempts at fraud or manipulation are discovered, I will be referring this case for criminal prosecution. My hands shook, but this time it was out of relief. The weight that had been hanging over me for months was finally lifting. Malcolm's face had gone pale, and I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. Bree looked like she was about to faint. She couldn't even look at the judge, her head turned down in shame. As the gavel came down, I felt the room shift. This was it. We had won. I turned to look at Maria, who gave me a slight nod, her lips tight with a satisfied smile. The fight wasn't over, but this was the first real victory. And I knew I wasn't going to stop until they paid for everything they'd done. This was just the beginning, but it was enough. For now, 2 weeks after the court ruling, things had calmed down, or at least, I thought they had. My mother and I had moved into a small, quiet apartment in a safe neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver. She still struggled with the idea that I was taking over her finances, that I was stepping in to take care of her in ways she had never needed before. It broke my heart to see her so confused, so lost, but at least she was safe now. At least she was with me, where she belonged. I had managed to get her set up with a trust, protecting her assets from further manipulation, and I had already started looking for a new place for both of us to settle into once the dust settled. The forensic audit was in progress, and things were moving slowly but steadily in my favor. But then came the phone call. I was in the middle of reviewing some documents when my phone buzzed. It was from an unknown number, and for a moment, I hesitated before answering. Hello, Leo? It's Tess. Tess. I hadn't heard from her since the court case. She was Malcolm's wife, and I had always believed she was just as complicit in his actions, maybe even more so. She had sat by silently during all of it, offering little more than a few polite words here and there, never stepping in when her husband and sister-in-law were draining my mother dry. What do you want, Tess? I asked, my voice clipped. There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation I didn't expect from her. I need you to come over, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Please. My heart skipped a beat. It was the last thing I wanted to do, have any kind of interaction with the people who had betrayed my mother, but I had a feeling I couldn't ignore. Something was wrong. Why? I asked. You'll understand when you get here, Tess replied, the urgency in her tone making my skin crawl. I can't do this alone. Please, Leo. I looked down at my phone, conflicted. I had no reason to trust Tess, but I had a feeling this wasn't about her. It was about Malcolm and Bree, and whatever they were trying to salvage from their mess. I'll be there in an hour, I said finally, hanging up before she could respond. As I drove toward their house, I felt a sense of unease creeping in. I hadn't been back to the family home since I confronted Malcolm. The place that once felt like home now felt like a prison, an ugly reminder of everything they had stolen from my mother. I could still see the immaculate lawn, the big windows, the grand entrance. It had all looked so perfect from the outside, until you saw what was going on behind the scenes. When I pulled up, Tess was standing outside, pacing in front of the house. She looked frazzled, her makeup smudged, her hair a little too messy for her usual polished appearance. She didn't even look like herself. "You came," she said when she saw me. Her voice sounded different, softer, almost defeated. "What's going on, Tess?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She looked around nervously before stepping toward me, lowering her voice. "It's Malcolm and Bree," she said, her voice shaking. "They're trying to take everything from you. They've been moving stuff behind your back, Leo, and they're doing it right now." I felt a chill run through me. What are they doing? I couldn't even ask the question, because I already had a feeling. "Where are they?" I demanded. Tess bit her lip, looking unsure. "They're inside, but I don't think they're expecting you. I'm not supposed to tell you this, Leo, but I can't just sit back anymore. They've taken so much from you and your mom, and I've let it happen. But I can't do it anymore." My mind was racing. What were they doing? I followed Tess inside, past the front hall, and into the living room. I could hear voices coming from upstairs. Malcolm's voice, low and steady. Bree's high-pitched laugh that I'd always found so irritating. "Listen, Leo," Tess whispered. "I'm sorry for everything. For standing by all this time. I was scared, too, you know. But I can't let them hurt you or your mom anymore." Before I could respond, the voices grew louder, and I knew it was time to confront them. I wasn't going to wait around for them to try and explain themselves. I walked toward the staircase, Tess following close behind. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my chest. At the top, I hesitated for just a moment, but then I heard it. "The house is as good as ours, Bree." Malcolm's voice was smooth, cold, with a hint of something dangerous lurking underneath. "Leo's going to be too distracted with his legal battle. It's the perfect time to sell it." I froze. The words cut through the air like a blade. My worst fears were coming true. They hadn't stopped. They hadn't given up. "No, we're keeping it." Bree's voice, sharp and defensive. "We can't back down now, not after everything we've done. We'll finish what we started. Leo won't get a cent." My chest tightened, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't let them get away with this. Not again. I pushed the door open without a second thought, stepping into the room where they stood. Malcolm and Bree both froze at the sight of me, their eyes widening in shock. They hadn't expected me to show up, not like this. But I wasn't going to let them play me again. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, my voice low but firm, echoing in the room like a warning. Malcolm's face twisted into something between surprise and fury. "Leo, this is none of your business. This house is ours. You can't stop us." I could feel Tess standing behind me, her presence a silent reminder that she was finally speaking up, but this wasn't her fight anymore. It was mine. "I'm stopping you right now," I said, stepping forward. "You think you've won, but I'm not backing down. You're not getting away with this, Malcolm. Not anymore." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of everything they had stolen. They were cornered now. "I don't need your help, Tess," I said, turning to face her. "But I'm done letting them destroy what's left of this family. You can walk away, or you can help me take them down." Tess nodded, her eyes wide with fear but determination. "Whatever you need," she whispered. And that was the moment I realized. This was the turning point. Not just for my mom, but for me. They had taken so much. But this was where it stopped. And I wasn't going to let them take another thing from us. "Get out," I said to Malcolm and Bree, my voice filled with finality. "This ends now." Malcolm and Bree exchanged a glance, both of them standing there for a long moment, trying to calculate their next move. But there was nothing left for them to say. Not anymore. And as they slowly turned to leave, I knew something had changed. This fight wasn't over, not yet, but I was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on the winning side. The weeks following that day were a blur of paperwork, legal battles, and the kind of silence that only comes when the truth has been exposed and the stakes have reached their peak. The forensic audit took longer than expected, as all these things tend to do. But as I waited, I kept reminding myself of one simple truth. This was worth it. Every second, every bit of energy I had poured into this fight was for my mother, for us. The day the charges were finally filed felt surreal, like I had been running a race for so long that I almost forgot what it was like to cross the finish line. It had been nearly 2 months since the court ruled in my favor, and now the moment I had been waiting for was here. The formal charges against Malcolm and Bree were set to be announced. I was sitting in my small apartment, alone as usual, when I got the call from Maria. "It's done," she said, her voice filled with that quiet satisfaction I had come to expect from her. The charges have been filed. The investigation is underway, and with the evidence we've gathered, they don't have a leg to stand on. I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the last few months finally lift off my shoulders. But I knew this was just the beginning of their downfall. The charges weren't just about money. They were about justice. They were about accountability. And for once, the law was on our side. The first wave of the legal fallout hit faster than I expected. Malcolm and Bree were both summoned to appear for questioning, and within days, their worlds started unraveling. I could see it in the court documents. Malcolm's financial accounts had been frozen, their assets seized. Even their personal bank accounts were under scrutiny. But what really hit them, what hurt them the most, was when Tess came forward. I couldn't believe it at first when I got the call from her. After everything that had happened, after all the intimidation and threats, she was ready to speak up. She was ready to testify. I wasn't sure what had changed in her, but I knew she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She couldn't continue being part of the lies. "I need to help you, Leo," Tess said when I picked up the phone. "I know I should have done this sooner, but I was scared. I thought I had no choice. But what they did to your mom, I can't let them get away with it." I was stunned. For so long, I had seen Tess as just another part of their scheme, someone who turned a blind eye to the truth. But this was different. She wasn't just helping me. She was taking a stand against her own family. "I'll be there," I said. "Whatever you need." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Tessa's testimony added weight to the case against Malcolm and Bree. She spoke about how they manipulated their mother, how they isolated her from her own finances, how they had led her to believe she was helping them by signing everything over. The things she knew were damning. Every detail she shared just made their actions clearer. And then came the final blow. Tess had uncovered something the forensic audit didn't catch. It was a set of text messages between Malcolm and a few of his associates, people I had never heard of. The messages were about the liquidation of my mother's assets. It was about Malcolm and Bree using my mom's money to cover their own debts, to invest in things they had no right to. They had been using her like a pawn for years. And the proof was now irrefutable. Maria called me the day we got access to the full transcripts of the texts. "We've got them, Leo," she said, her voice thick with the satisfaction of knowing they had nowhere to hide. "This is it. The prosecutor's going to push for a plea deal. We'll make sure it sticks." The plea deal came just as I expected. Malcolm and Bree were offered the chance to avoid trial, to repay what they had stolen over the course of the next 20 years in monthly installments with interest. If they missed a single payment, the deal would be off and the criminal charges would be brought forward. At first, they resisted. I could see the pride in Malcolm's eyes, the stubbornness that had defined him for so long. But the reality of the situation hit him soon enough. The idea of going to trial, of the media catching wind of their crimes, it was enough to make even the most arrogant man reconsider. So they accepted. It wasn't about the money, not anymore. It was about watching them squirm, watching them realize that they couldn't just take and take without consequences. Watching them sign a contract that would bind them for the next 2 decades. When I finally sat down with my mother to explain what had happened, I could see the relief in her eyes. She hadn't fully understood what was going on until the legal jargon had been broken down for her, until she realized that she could finally breathe again. The weight of years of manipulation, of guilt and fear, had been lifted. "Leo," she said softly, looking at me with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words. "You don't have to worry about that anymore, Mom. I've got you. I always will." A week later, I received a letter from the prosecutor. It was short, to the point. They had agreed to the terms of the plea deal. Malcolm and Bree would be repaying what they had stolen, with interest. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. They wouldn't be behind bars. But it was justice, in its own way. As I sat down to read the letter, a feeling of quiet satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but it was enough. We had won. And as for Malcolm and Bree, well, I knew they would never be the same. They had lost everything that truly mattered: their integrity, their reputation, their control over our family. They were still rich, still powerful in their own way, but now they were bound by their debts, by the promises they had to keep for the next 20 years. I didn't feel sorry for them. What they had done to my mother, what they had taken from her, could never be undone. But at least now, they had to live with the consequences. As I sat back in my chair, looking out the window at the Denver skyline, I realized something. Justice wasn't always immediate. It wasn't always clean. But in the end, it always found a way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. We were free.